A strange eye floats upward in a deep black sky, attached to a balloon. This is not a child's drawing, but a 19th century masterpiece by Odilon Redon. The most haunting art of that era was never just about beauty. It was a secret language. These artists were not simply painting dreams. They were attempting to map the invisible world, to speak with spirits, and to decode ancient wisdom using brush and canvas. This movement was called Symbolism, and it rose as a direct rebellion against the cold facts of realism and the grinding noise of industrial materialism. By the end of our journey, you will see these familiar paintings as coded messages and understand the occult keys needed to decipher them. We will uncover how secret societies and mystical doctrines provided the blueprints for these visions. What hidden truth were these artists trying to communicate through veiled symbols and ghostly figures? That floating eye was a direct response to a world that felt increasingly hollow. The late 19th century was a time of astonishing contradiction. On one hand, humanity seemed to be conquering everything. Steam engines powered cities, railways stitched continents together, and science was explaining the universe with cold, hard laws. Charles Darwin had shown life evolving through natural selection, while Karl Marx analyzed society through the mechanics of class and capital. The message was clear. Everything, from a bird's wing to human history, could be reduced to material processes. For many, traditional religion could no longer hold against this tide of facts. This created a profound spiritual vacuum, a deep, unsettling hunger for meaning that went beyond machinery and markets. People felt adrift in a disenchanted universe, and nature, as we know, abhors a vacuum. Into this void rushed a powerful countercurrent, a widespread yearning for the mystical and the transcendent. This was not a retreat into old faiths, but a search for new, often hidden forms of wisdom. It manifested in a spectacular occult revival that swept through drawing rooms and studios. Spiritualism became a cultural phenomenon, with families holding seances to contact lost loved ones, believing mediums could bridge the world of the living and the dead. It was a democratization of the afterlife, accessible to anyone with a table and a dim light. More systematically, in 1875, the enigmatic Madame Helena Blavatsky founded the Theosophical Society. Theosophy proposed a grand, secret history of the world, teaching that all religions sprang from one ancient, universal wisdom tradition. It spoke of ascended masters, hidden continents like Atlantis, and the spiritual evolution of humanity through cycles of reincarnation. For artists tired of painting peasants or pretty landscapes, this was rocket fuel for the imagination. Simultaneously, ancient esoteric orders like the Rosicrucians and Hermeticists saw a major revival. These secret societies studied alchemy, Kabbalah, and sacred geometry, viewing the universe as a living, symbolic text to be decoded. This was the fertile, mystical soil. Artists of the time were standing at a crossroads. One path led to the noisy, soot-stained world of factories and facts. The other path led into the shadowy, silent library of the occult, filled with maps of invisible realms and alphabets of forgotten symbols. The symbolists did not hesitate. They turned their backs on the material world and stepped into the twilight, seeking a new vocabulary in these secret doctrines. Their art would become the visual manifestation of this great spiritual search. But how exactly did these obscure ideas translate onto canvas? The answer lies in a single, powerful concept that acted as a master key for the entire movement. The symbolists were not painting what they saw, but what they knew, while the Impressionists chased the fleeting play of external light on water and leaves, and the realists documented the hard facts of social life. The symbolists turned their gaze completely inward. Their subject was the hidden landscape of the mind, the world of dreams, emotions, and the absolute truths they believed existed behind the veil of mere appearance. This was not art as observation, it was art as revelation. In 1886, the poet Jean Moraes published the Symbolist Manifesto in a Paris newspaper, providing a battle cry for this new direction. He declared that the goal of art was not to describe the object itself, but to clothe the idea in a sensory form. The idea, with a capital I, was everything. It was the eternal, the mystical, the soul of things that could never be fully captured in words or a straightforward image. So how do you paint an idea? You cannot sketch hope or photograph a memory. The answer was the symbol. For the symbolists, a symbol was far more than a simple sign, like a stop sign or a company logo. A true symbol was a living key, a resonant object or image that could unlock a doorway in the viewer's own consciousness. A rose in a symbolist painting was never just a flower. It could be an emblem of secret love, spiritual purity, or the painful beauty of a fleeting life. A winding path was not a trail through a forest, but the mysterious journey of the soul. This is where the deep connection to the occult becomes undeniable. Occult practices, from alchemy to Kabbalah, have always operated on this exact principle. They use symbols, diagrams, and rituals as tools to transform the practitioner's inner state and connect with higher realities. An alchemist's flask and strange ingredients were symbols for the purification of the self. A Kabbalist's tree of life was a symbolic map of the divine structure of the universe. For the symbolist artist, the canvas became their ritual space, and their symbols became the tools to evoke a spiritual experience. They were not illustrating occult texts. They were practicing a form of visual magic, aiming to conjure the ineffable directly in the mind of the beholder. Madame Blavatsky offered a map of the entire cosmos. Her two monumental works, Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine, were not just books, they were encyclopedias of the unseen. She wove together threads from Hindu and Buddhist philosophy, ancient Egyptian rites, Kabbalah, and Gnostic thought into a single, breathtaking tapestry. This was the ultimate secret history, claiming that all the world's religions were merely fragments of one primordial truth, guarded by hidden spiritual masters in remote parts of the world. For artists drowning in the mundane, this was a revelation. It gave them permission to look beyond Europe, to see the entire spiritual heritage of humanity as their palette. But Theosophy was more than just a story. It was a detailed cosmology filled with concepts that became direct fuel for artistic vision. Take the astral plane, a subtle realm of thought and emotion that exists just beyond our physical sight. This was the perfect explanation for the dreamlike, floating figures and luminous landscapes in symbolist art. They were attempts to depict this very plane. Then there were the Akashic Records, a cosmic library said to contain every thought, event, and sensation that ever occurred. Imagine an artist trying to paint not a moment, but memory itself, or the collective soul of humanity. That impulse is pure Theosophy. The doctrine of spiritual evolution, through cycles of reincarnation and ascending root races, provided a grand narrative of progress that was spiritual, not industrial. This framework told artists their work could be a catalyst for human evolution, while the symbolist movement included many fellow travelers. Some artists dove in completely. The Russian painter Wassily Kandinsky, though his major abstract work came later, was a devoted theosophist who wrote that color and form could vibrate like a spiritual tuning fork. Even the early, pre-grid work of Piet Mondrian was deeply shaped by these ideas, seeking to find the geometric harmony underlying nature's chaos. Theosophy did not just give artists strange ideas to illustrate, it gave them a sacred mission. It transformed the canvas from a surface for depicting the world into a portal, for revealing the hidden architecture of the universe. Their art became a form of visual scripture for a new age. Yet there was another, even more secretive and visually rich tradition that offered a different set of keys to these artists, while Theosophy painted on a vast cosmic canvas. A different and deeply influential current flowed from the very heart of Paris itself. The French occult revival was not a distant philosophy. It was a living, breathing scene in the cafes and bookshops these artists frequented, and at its center stood a towering, controversial figure, a defrocked priest who would become the architect of modern ceremonial magic, Eliphas Lévy. Born Alphonse Louis Constant, his life was a rebellion against the rigid dogma of his training, leading him to synthesize a new spiritual system from the fragments of Western esotericism. His seminal work, Dogma and Ritual of High Magic, published in the 1850s, was nothing short of a revelation. It took the dense, often impenetrable texts of alchemy, Kabbalah, and medieval grimoires and repackaged them into a coherent, dramatic doctrine for the modern seeker. For artists hungry for a symbolic language rooted in European tradition, Lévy provided the dictionary and the grammar. His core teaching was the ancient principle of correspondences, summed up in the Hermetic maxim, as above, so below. This idea proposes that every element in the physical world, every plant, stone, color, or sound, is intimately connected to a spiritual reality. The universe is a vast, interconnected web of symbols, and to understand one layer is to gain knowledge of another. This was a philosophical bombshell for the symbolists. It meant that the objects they chose to paint, the colors they mixed on their palette, were not arbitrary. A lily was not just a lily. It corresponded to purity and was linked to specific celestial forces. The color blue was not merely a hue. It vibrated with the energy of contemplation and the divine. Lévy taught that symbols and images held real, tangible power. They were not passive decorations, but active instruments. A correctly constructed symbol could focus spiritual energy, act as a protective talisman, or even open a portal to other realms of consciousness. Can you see how this transforms the very purpose of a painting? For a symbolist artist immersed in these ideas, the canvas became a sacred space, a ritual surface. Each element was carefully chosen not just for composition, but for its occult correspondence. The painting was no longer a window onto a scene. It was an object of power, designed to evoke a specific spiritual or emotional state in the viewer, to initiate a silent, visual ritual. Lévy's influence rippled out through generations. He directly inspired figures like Pappus, the pen name of Gerard Encausse, who founded modern Martinism and wrote extensively on the tarot and Kabbalah, keeping these ideas alive in the Parisian artistic underground. This magical framework gave artists like Gustave Moreau or Odilon Redon a profound sense of purpose. They were not mere decorators. They were modern magicians, wielding brushes to manifest the invisible. But one artist, perhaps more than any other, took this mandate and built an entire, breathtaking world from it. This magical framework needed a home, a physical space where ideas could breathe and artists could find each other. They found it not in official academies, but in hidden rooms and candle-lit apartments, the invisible colleges of the fin de siècle, while the public visited grand salons filled with classical nudes and heroic history paintings. A very different kind of gathering was happening across Paris. Here, in the private apartments of poets and the back rooms of bookshops, the boundaries between artist, poet, and magician dissolved completely. The most famous of these was the Tuesday Salon of Stéphane Mallarmé. Each week, in his modest flat on the Rue de Rome, the great symbolist poet would host a remarkable convergence of minds. Painters like Odilon Redon and James McNeill Whistler would sit alongside writers, musicians, and occultists like the young Paul Valéry. The air thick with tobacco smoke and intense conversation, they debated the nature of the ideal, the power of suggestion over statement, and the latest revelations from esoteric texts. This was not a lecture hall. It was a living laboratory for a new aesthetic, where a painter might hear a phrase from a poem and suddenly see a new composition, or where a magician's description of an astral vision would become the blueprint for a canvas. These salons provided something the artists desperately needed: validation. In this room, their obsession with dreams and symbols was not considered madness, but the highest form of intellectual and spiritual pursuit. It was a sanctuary from a materialist world, but some sought to go further, to create not just a weekly meeting, but a structured order with its own rituals and public face. This led to the formation of formal, yet secretive, societies that explicitly merged art and occultism. In 1888, two key figures founded the Kabbalistic Order of the Rose Cross, or Order Kabbalistique de la Rose Croix. Led by the Marquis Stanislas de Guaita and the physician Pappas, this was a serious esoteric school focused on ceremonial magic, alchemy, and the study of Hebrew mysticism. While not an art movement itself, its very existence sanctified the symbolic language artists were using. More importantly, it inspired a splinter group that would directly catapult symbolist art into the public eye. That same year, the flamboyant and controversial Josephine Paladin, a novelist and mystic, broke away to found his own order, the Salon de la Rose Croix. Paladin was a character of legendary eccentricity, often appearing in velvet robes, declaring himself a Tsar or Assyrian priest-king, yet his impact was profound. He declared war on realism, which he saw as a celebration of ugliness, and on the industrial society that produced it. His mission was to restore the ideal, the mystical, and the Catholic tradition through art. Starting in 1892, Paladin organized a series of annual art exhibitions that became the most important showcase for symbolist painting in Europe. He issued a manifesto with strict rules: no contemporary scenes, no patriotic or military subjects, no portraits unless they were of a mystical nature. Instead, he called for works inspired by Catholic dogma, legend, myth, allegory, and dreams. The response was electric. Artists from across the continent, including Fern and Kagenopf, Carlos Schwabe, and Jan Torup, eagerly submitted works that fit this mystical brief. For the first time, symbolist artists had a dedicated, curated platform that understood their philosophical goals. Paladin's salon provided patronage, a built-in audience of fellow travelers, and most crucially, a shared philosophical language. It created a visible, powerful subculture where esoteric ideas were not fringe theories, but the very intellectual currency of a creative elite. This network of salons and secret societies formed the nervous system of the movement, transmitting occult concepts directly into the bloodstream of modern art. But what did this shared language actually look like on the canvas? To understand that, we must learn to read their symbols. Deep within his cluttered Parisian studio, a space more akin to a sorcerer's library than an artist's atelier, Gustave Moreau was conducting silent experiments. He was not mixing chemicals, but pigments and symbols, seeking the precise formula to make the invisible visible. Moreau is often called the grandfather of French symbolism, and for good reason. While others in the movement were poets or philosophers first, Moreau was a dedicated, almost obsessive researcher of the occult. His studio was a temple filled not with sketches, but with ancient manuscripts, esoteric texts, and artifacts. He did not merely read about alchemy and mysticism. He lived within their concepts, and his paintings became the meticulous records of his spiritual inquiries. Take his infamous work, The Apparition. On the surface, it is a biblical scene, Salome dancing before King Herod, but Moreau transforms it into a psychic explosion. The princess points a trembling finger, not at the king, but at a vision materializing in the air before her, the severed, radiant head of John the Baptist hovering in a halo of light. This is not a historical illustration. It is a painting of a moment of horrific spiritual revelation. the ornate, jewel-encrusted palace, the hypnotic patterns on the floor. Every decorative element is a deliberate symbol meant to induce a trance-like state in the viewer, to pull us into Salom's own terrifying vision. Moreau was visualizing the moment the material world cracks open to reveal the supernatural. His ambition grew even more vast in works like Jupiter and Semele. Here, the myth of the mortal woman Semele, destroyed by gazing upon the full glory of the god Jupiter, becomes a map of cosmic hierarchy and spiritual annihilation. The painting is an overwhelming tapestry. Jupiter sits enthroned at the center, a colossal, androgynous figure embodying divine unity. Radiating from him are concentric circles of gods, angels, and mythological beasts, representing the layered orders of the universe, a direct visual echo of Kabbalistic Sephiroth, or the emanations described in mystic text. Semele, a small, limp figure, lies across his lap, having been dissolved by the sheer force of ultimate truth. Moreau is painting the impossible, the moment of transcendence so complete it destroys the individual self. His signature style, with its encrusted surfaces, labyrinthine details, and hallucinatory space, was his chosen method. This overwhelming complexity was not mere decoration. It was a deliberate technique to short-circuit logical thought. You cannot rationally parse every gem, every strange hybrid creature, every architectural folly. Instead, you are meant to be overwhelmed, to surrender to the image and experience it as a total environment, a gateway to a sublime and terrifying spiritual plane. For Moreau, the subjects, be they Salome, Semele, or Orpheus, were merely vessels. His true subject was always the same, the ecstatic and dreadful process of transformation, the alchemy of the soul, moving from a state of base consciousness to a golden, divine awareness. His studio was his sealed vessel, and his paintings were the philosopher's stone, crystallized visions meant to trigger a similar transformation in those who truly saw them. And though he was a recluse, his influence was profound. As a teacher at the École des Beaux-Arts, he taught a generation, including Georges Wald and even a young Henri Matisse, to respect the power of the inner vision over the outer imitation. He showed them that art could be a sacred, ritualistic act. While Moreau built jeweled palaces for the gods, another artist chose a far stranger and more intimate path, venturing into the silent, black depths of the personal psyche. Odilon Redon worked in a realm of profound silence, while Gustave Moreau constructed ornate, symbolic temples. Redon explored the shadowy corridors of the individual mind. He became the supreme painter of the in-between, that fragile threshold where sleep meets waking, where logic dissolves and the inner eye opens. His early works, a series he called his noirs, were not paintings at all, but haunting drawings rendered entirely in charcoal. These were not sketches for something larger. They were complete statements from the depths. In these velvety black fields, strange forms coalesce. A single giant eyeball drifting like a balloon, a spider with a human face smiling in the center of its body, a mournful head severed from its body yet still alive and contemplative. Redon was not illustrating stories. He was documenting sightings from a personal frontier. This frontier had a name in the occult circles he moved within, the astral plane. Theosophists and spiritualists described it as a subtle realm of thought forms and psychic energy, visible only to the inner senses. Redon's noirs feel like direct transcriptions from that non-physical space. His iconic work, The Cyclops, is a perfect key to understanding this. On the surface, it depicts the myth of Polyphemus, the one-eyed giant, but Redon's interpretation is utterly interior. The giant does not rage. He peers with a single, immense, and strangely gentle eye over a hill at a tiny, sleeping nymph. The landscape is organic, pulsing, like the interior of a living brain. This is not a monster in a cave. It is the visualization of a powerful psychic entity, a dominant thought or emotion looming over the quiet landscape of the unconscious mind. It is a portrait of observation itself, the self watching the self. Even his later, radiant pastels, like his series on the birth of Venus, reject classical beauty. His Venus is often a spectral, luminous form emerging from a swirling cosmic haze, less a goddess of love and more an astral projection, a thought form of ideal beauty materializing from the ether. Rodin was deeply embedded in the symbolist network, a close friend of the writer Stéphane Mallarmé, who shared his belief in suggestion over description. Rodin stated his artistic mission with perfect clarity. He aimed to place the visible at the service of the invisible. Every floating eye, every hybrid creature, every radiant head in his work finds a direct parallel in the literature of mysticism and clairvoyance. Spiritualist texts are filled with accounts of seeing disembodied eyes during seances, symbols of spiritual oversight. Descriptions of the astral plane speak of encountering composite beings, guardians or thought forms that defy earthly biology. Rodin gave these reported visions a tangible, if unsettling, form. He was not a decorator of myths, but a sensitive receiver, translating the frequencies of the hidden world into images that bypass our reason and speak directly to our own latent sense of the mysterious. His art asks us a quiet, persistent question: what shapes move in the darkness of your own mind when the light of day is gone? Carlos Schwabe gave the invisible world a startling clarity. Where Rodin explored ambiguous psychic spaces, Schwabe, a Swiss painter deeply devoted to theosophy, created crisp, luminous visions that served as direct illustrations of occult doctrine. His art was less an open-ended question and more a beautifully rendered answer, a visual sermon on the spiritual truths he held as certain. This made him perhaps the most overtly mystical of all the symbolists, an artist whose every brushstroke aimed to educate and elevate the viewer toward a higher understanding. His commitment was publicly declared from the very beginning as he designed the iconic poster for the first Salon de la Rose-Croix in 1892. That image is a perfect manifesto in visual form. It depicts a mystical knight in armor, holding a sword and a lily, guiding a veiled maiden up a steep, flower-strewn path toward a radiant temple on a hill. This is not a scene of earthly romance, but one of spiritual chivalry. The knight represents the artist initiate, armed with purity and spiritual discipline, tasked with leading the soul, the maiden, away from the mundane world and toward the sacred ideal, the temple of art and wisdom. It framed the entire salon's mission not as an exhibition, but as a pilgrimage. But Schwabe's most profound and unsettling statement on this spiritual journey is his masterpiece, The Death of the Grave Digger. Painted in the final years of the 19th century, it is a breathtakingly direct visualization of theosophical beliefs about death and the afterlife. The scene is both serene and dramatic. An old grave digger has died at his work, collapsing backwards into an open grave he himself has just dug. But this is not an end. It is a magnificent beginning. From his physical body, which we see already beginning to decay and merge with the earth, a luminous, youthful soul form rises. This radiant double, the astral body, is being gently guided upward by a majestic angel with vast, soft wings. The angel does not pull the soul, but simply points the way toward a transcendent, golden light that floods the top of the canvas. The landscape itself is a symbolic map. The dark, open grave represents the physical plane, the realm of matter and decay. The middle ground, where the angel stands, is the twilight world of transition. And the blazing, ethereal light above is the spiritual plane, the destination. Every element is a precise doctrinal symbol. The decaying corpse is not feared, but shown as a discarded shell, a necessary garment for the material world. The luminous soul is the true, eternal identity. The angel represents the guiding forces, the ascended masters or spiritual helpers described in Theosophy, who assist in the transition after death. Even the season is significant. The snowdrops blooming in the foreground symbolize hope, renewal, and the soul's victory over the winter of death. Schwabe leaves nothing to chance. He is not suggesting a mystery. He is diagramming a process he believed was a scientific fact of the spiritual universe. His work makes explicit what is often veiled in other symbolist art, the concrete, step-by-step vision of the occult philosophy that fueled it. To look at the death of the grave digger is to receive a lecture on the afterlife, delivered not with words, but with sublime and comforting imagery. It transforms the great human fear of death into a narrative of glorious release and ascension. In doing so, Schwabe fulfilled the ultimate theosophical goal for art, to serve as a tool for spiritual evolution, a clear window into the hidden laws that govern existence. His paintings are less like dreams and more like pages from a sacred textbook, rendered with such poetic beauty that the lesson feels like a revelation. Ferdinand Kejnap built a temple to house his own silence, while other symbolists painted visions of gods and cosmic journeys. The Belgian master turned his focus inward, creating an art of profound introspection and hermetic secrecy. A founding member of the avant-garde group Les Vingt, or the 20, Kejnap moved in circles that buzzed with esoteric ideas, yet his personal path was one of quiet, almost monastic devotion to a single great mystery, the duality of the self. His work became a lifelong ritual to explore the hidden chambers of memory, identity, and the occult concept of the higher, perfected double. To understand Kejnap, you must first understand his two most constant muses, who were, in a mystical sense, one and the same. The first was his own face. He produced countless self-portraits, not out of vanity, but as a form of psychic cartography. In these images, his gaze is never confrontational. It is distant, inward-looking, as if he is observing a separate entity, studying the vessel that contained his consciousness. The second muse was his sister, Marguerite. She appears again and again in his work, not as a sibling but as an icon. He transformed her into a sphinx, a priestess, a Medusa, an angel, an emblem of an inaccessible, eternal feminine principle. In paintings like Memories or The Abandoned City, Marguerite is a solitary figure adrift in landscapes of empty squares and still water, embodying a state of pure, contemplative being. For Kejnap, she represented the other half of a spiritual equation, the anima to his animus, the externalized image of his own inner ideal. This obsession with duality finds its most startling expression in his famous and bizarre painting, The Caress. The scene reimagines the myth of Oedipus and the Sphinx. A youthful, almost effeminate Oedipus stands draped in a leopard skin, his hand resting gently on the jaw of a majestic, golden-eyed Sphinx with the head of a woman. The Sphinx's body is that of a cheetah, and its face is a mask of serene, knowing power. The true shock is their androgyny. They mirror each other. Oedipus possesses a delicate, feminine beauty, while the Sphinx's features are strong, regal, and masculine. This is not a battle of wits. It is a silent, erotic communion between two aspects of the same consciousness, the human intellect and the animal instinct, the masculine and the feminine, united in a moment of esoteric understanding. The riddle here is not a question to be answered, but a state of being to be achieved, the reconciliation of opposites, a core tenet of alchemical and hermetic philosophy. Kejnap did not just paint this ideal of a sealed, perfect world. He built it. He designed his own home and studio in Brussels, which he called the Temple of the Self. Every detail was meticulously controlled, a physical manifestation of his psyche. The rooms were sparsely furnished, dominated by specific colors, and filled with symbolic objects, replicas of his own artworks, and portraits of Marguerite. It was a hermetic sanctuary, a labyrinth with a single occupant at its center. He even installed a door with no exterior handle, ensuring his solitude was absolute and on his own terms. Within these walls, art was not a profession. It was a daily ritual of inner exploration. Each painting was an act of consecration, a slow, precise spell cast to capture a fragment of that elusive higher self. Caithnop's legacy is the enigma itself, a reminder that the most profound occult journey may not be upward to the stars, but inward through the silent galleries of one's own soul. While Caithnop constructed a temple for one, another artist wove an entire cosmology from threads gathered across the world. Jan Torup stood at a unique crossroads, a living bridge between continents and spiritual traditions. Born in Java to a Dutch father and Chinese-Indonesian mother, and educated in Europe, Torup absorbed a dizzying array of influences that he fused into a singular, hypnotic style. His work demonstrates that symbolism was never a purely European phenomenon. It was a global spiritual language, eagerly incorporating the sacred visual codes of the East into its quest for universal truth. Torup found his philosophical home in Theosophy, which validated his own multicultural heritage by teaching that all religions and mythologies were fragments of one ancient wisdom. This belief liberated him to create a new symbolic alphabet drawn from Christian iconography, Javanese shadow puppetry, and the intricate patterns of batik textiles. His masterpiece, and perhaps the most densely coded single image of the entire movement, is the monumental drawing The Three Brides. At first glance, it is a mesmerizing tangle, a forest of swirling, hair-like lines that seem to vibrate on the paper. But within this rhythmic chaos, three distinct female figures emerge, seated in a row, each representing a path for the human soul. On the left sits the celestial bride, her face serene and mask-like, crowned with a halo of radiant lines. She is pure spirit, detached from earthly concerns, her gaze turned inward toward divine contemplation. To her right is the terrestrial bride, her expression one of ecstatic, almost painful longing. Vines and sensual flowers entwine her, symbolizing earthly passion and the binding nature of physical desire. Finally, on the far right, we meet the demonic bride, a grotesque figure with hollow eyes and claw-like hands, crowned with a nest of serpents. She represents the soul corrupted by materialism and base instincts, a descent into spiritual emptiness. Flanking this trinity are two monumental praying mantises, insects symbolic of both prayer and predatory deception in theosophical lore, guarding the threshold of this spiritual choice. The entire scene is enveloped in Torup's signature whiplash lines, a technique he called lineament. These are not mere decoration. They are the painting's true subject, a visual representation of cosmic energy, the vibratory currents of the astral plane as described by Blavatsky. They connect everything, showing the invisible threads of fate and consequence linking the three choices. The composition is a spiritual flowchart, a theosophical diagram of karma and consequence rendered with the hypnotic rhythm of a sacred chant. This rhythmic quality is the direct infusion of Eastern mysticism. Torup's lineament did not come from European art academies. It was inspired by the precise, flowing patterns of Javanese batik. In batik, every curl and dot is symbolic, carrying prayers and stories into the cloth through wax and dye. Torup adopted this principle, treating his line not as contour, but as a carrier of spiritual vibration. He translated the meditative, repetitive act of batik making into drawing, believing the very motion of his hand could channel universal energies. In The Three Brides, the line becomes a mantra, pulling the viewer into a trance-like state to contemplate the soul's eternal dilemma. Torup proved that the symbolist quest for the absolute could not be confined to European cathedrals or Greek myths. It demanded a wider lens. He listened to the whispers of Javanese ancestors and the hum of theosophical spheres, weaving them together into a vision that asked, which bride does your soul resemble? The stark, shocking line of Aubrey Beardsley cuts through the velvet mysticism of the continent like a razor. In England, the symbolist movement took a darker, more subversive turn, embracing a philosophy known as decadence. This was not about spiritual ascent, but about a fascinated descent into the shadowy corners of desire, artifice, and taboo. And no artist embodied this dangerous allure more completely than the wonderkind illustrator Aubrey Beardsley. Tubercular, dandyish, and ferociously talented, Beardsley died at just 25, but in his brief career, he created a visual language that perfectly captured the fin de siècle obsession with transgression, a fascination deeply intertwined with the occult's own interest in the forbidden. His work is often remembered for its explicit eroticism and wicked satire, but to see only that is to miss the profound occult current running beneath its ink-stained surface. Beardsley was plumbing the depths of what esoteric traditions sometimes call the shadow self, those repressed desires and primal energies that conventional morality seeks to bury. In certain magical currents, from interpretations of Tantra to the rituals of Aleister Crowley's emerging circle, this raw, erotic energy was not something to be denied, but a potent force to be harnessed for spiritual transformation. Beardsley's art, in its fearless confrontation with the grotesque and the sensual, taps directly into this dangerous idea. Consider his most famous commission, the illustrations for Oscar Wilde's play, Salome. While Gustave Moreau painted Salome's vision, Beardsley illustrated her world, a world of perverse elegance and lurking horror. His drawings for the English edition are masterpieces of controlled chaos. In the peacock skirt, Salome's costume becomes an architecture of sinuous lines and staring peacock eye patterns, the bird itself a traditional symbol of vanity and immortality, but here rendered as something predatory and hypnotic. The figure of Salome is all elongated limbs and calculated gesture, her power derived not from spiritual purity, but from a terrifying, amoral will. In the climax, the moment of John the Baptist's beheading is depicted with chilling abstraction. A grotesque plume of blood erupts in a perfectly stylized pattern from a severed neck, while Salome holds the head with a look of sublime, detached satisfaction. The image is less about biblical narrative and more about the ecstatic release of a forbidden act, the transformative power of a taboo broken. Beardsley's use of stark black and white is itself a magical act. There are no comforting shades of gray, no soft transitions. It is a world of absolute opposites, of light and void, a visual representation of the dualities that occultism seeks to reconcile: spirit and matter, sacred and profane, life and death, forced into a tense, inseparable embrace on the page. This ethos defined his role as art editor for the notorious literary magazine, The Yellow Book. The publication's very name was a signal, yellow being the color associated with French decadent novels, often wrapped in yellow paper to denote their scandalous content. Beardsley's covers and illustrations for the magazine created a unified aesthetic of sophisticated decay. His figures, with their exaggerated features, languid poses, and mocking expressions, seem to inhabit a hothouse world where nature is entirely artificial and every emotion is a carefully staged performance. In drawings like the comedy ballet of marionettes, human beings become puppet-like, their strings pulled by unseen forces of desire and social convention. This reflected a deep fin de siècle anxiety about degeneration, the fear that civilization was not evolving upward, but unraveling into perversion and weakness. Yet from an occult perspective, this very unraveling could be a necessary deconstruction. To break down the old, rigid self was the first step in a magical rebirth. Beardsley's grotesques, his leering fauns and monstrous women, are not just criticisms of society. They are explorations of the chaotic, primal forms that underlie our polished personas. He channels the same energy that rituals of inversion sought to tap, understanding that truth often resides in the very things we are taught to fear and reject. His pervasive sexual symbolism, from phallic candles to yonic flowers, is blatant, but it is also deeply serious. It insists that the driving force of life, creative and destructive, must be acknowledged as a fundamental cosmic power. Aubrey Beardsley's legacy is the beauty of the forbidden shape. He reminds us that the occult revival was not solely a search for angelic light, but also a courageous and sometimes terrifying journey into the dark pools of our own nature, where the most potent magic was often said to begin. While Beardsley inked the shadows, writers across the Channel were conjuring entire worlds from words. Symbolism was never just a visual art. It was a literary revolution that ran on parallel tracks, with novelists and poets often acting as the direct architects for the painter's visions. These were not mere observers of the occult revival. They were active participants, writer-magicians who plunged into secret societies and then returned to document the abyss, providing the narratives and the dark glamour that artists would translate into unforgettable imagery. The first of these visionary architects was a man who dreamed of a theater of the absolute, Villiers de l'Isle Adam. His monumental occult drama, Axel, published in 1890, became a sacred text for the symbolist generation. The plot is deceptively simple. A young nobleman, Axel, who has studied alchemy and magic in his remote castle, encounters a beautiful young woman, Sarah, who has come to steal a legendary treasure he guards. They fall in love, but in a shocking climax, they choose to reject the material world entirely, including their own lives and the treasure, seeing earthly existence as a pale shadow of the spiritual truths they have glimpsed. In a famous declaration, Axel tells Sarah, "Live, our servants will do that for us." They then drink poison, choosing a deliberate, ecstatic death to attain a higher plane of existence. This was not a tragedy, but a manifesto. Villiers presented the ultimate symbolist act, the total renunciation of the mundane for the sake of pure spiritual knowledge. For artists, Axel provided a philosophical blueprint, a story that validated their own retreat from realism into the castle of the mind. The play's atmosphere, a blend of medieval mysticism, Rosicrucian lore, and sublime defiance, saturated the artistic milieu, making the artist's studio itself feel like Axel's remote sanctuary, a place where the material world could be shut out in pursuit of the ideal. But if Villiers charted a path of ascetic, luminous rejection, another writer embarked on a far more dangerous and sensational descent, one that would scandalize Europe and offer painters a catalog of forbidden imagery. Joris Karl Huysmans began his career as a leading naturalist, documenting the grit and grime of Parisian life with scientific detachment. Yet, a profound spiritual crisis led him on a legendary pivot, a journey from documenting the outer filth to exploring the inner corruption of the soul. He chronicled this shocking transformation in his 1891 novel, La Basse, which translates to Down There. The book is a semi-autobiographical sensation, following a writer named Durdle, who becomes obsessed with the history of the infamous 15th century child murderer Gilles de Rais, a nobleman turned Satanist. Durdle's research pulls him into the very much alive Parisian occult underground of the 1880s. Huysmans, drawing from his own investigations, delivers what purports to be a first-hand, meticulously detailed account of a contemporary Black Mass. The descriptions are lurid and unforgettable: profaned hosts, inverted crosses, and obscene rituals performed in the name of spiritual rebellion. La Basse was a literary bombshell. It did not just describe Satanism, it seemed to expose it, offering readers a terrifying guided tour into a world they had only suspected. For symbolist artists, Huysmans' book was a revelation of a different kind. It provided a gritty, modern mythology, The figure of Gilles de Rais, the aristocrat who turned his castle into a charnel house in search of occult power, became a potent symbol of decadence taken to its furthest, most horrific extreme. The imagery of the Black Mass, with its perversion of sacred symbols, gave painters a new visual vocabulary for depicting spiritual conflict, not with angels and devils from medieval frescoes, but with a chilling, contemporary psychological realism. Huysmans showed that the occult underground was not just about light and ascent, but also about a fascinated crawl through the basements of belief. His journey did not end in Satanism, however. It ultimately led him to a fraught conversion to Catholicism, a path many symbolists would also wrestle with, caught between the lure of forbidden knowledge and the longing for orthodox sanctuary. Together, Villiers and Huysmans mapped the extreme frontiers of the symbolist psyche, one pointing upward toward a death of transcendence, the other downward into a world of transgressive ritual. They proved that the pen could be a magical tool as potent as the brush, writing the scripts from which the era's most haunting visual dreams were staged. Huysmans did not merely write a novel. He conducted a seance with history's darkest ghosts. The protagonist of La Basse, Durdle, is a novelist in a state of profound disgust with modern life, a mirror of Huysmans himself. His search for a subject leads him not to the living, but to the dead, specifically to the 15th century figure of Gilles de Rais, once a wealthy nobleman and comrade in arms to Joan of Arc. Rais descended into a vortex of occult obsession, kidnapping, torturing, and murdering countless children in a deranged quest to summon demons and unlock the secrets of alchemy. For Durdle, and for Huysmans, Rais was not just a monster. He was the ultimate symbol of spiritual decay, a man who used esoteric knowledge not for ascent, but for a plunge into absolute evil. This historical research becomes a dangerous doorway. As Durdle digs deeper into the archives of depravity, his own world begins to warp. He is drawn into correspondence with, and then into the orbit of, a living Satanist priest, the sinister Canon Doker. This character was not pure invention. Huysmans based him on a real and notorious figure in the Parisian occult underground, a defrocked priest named Joseph Antoine Boulin, who led a cult devoted to a heretical mix of mysticism and sexual magic. The line between Durdle's scholarly curiosity and personal fascination dissolves completely, and he finds himself an invited observer to the very thing he has been studying, a black mass. The scene Huysmans paints is not vague horror. It is a shockingly detailed report. He describes a squalid apartment, an altar made from a naked woman's body, profaned sacramental wafers, and rituals designed to invert every sacred Catholic rite. The air is thick with incense and blasphemy. This was the book's true scandal. Readers could not tell where documented investigation ended and lurid fiction began. Huysmans had friends who were involved in these circles, and his descriptions carried the chilling weight of testimony. He blurred the lines so effectively that the public felt they were not reading a story, but peering through a keyhole into a real and active inferno. For the symbolist artists watching from the sidelines, La Basse was a seismic event. It did something crucial. It made the iconography of diabolism modern and psychologically complex. It moved Satanism out of medieval woodcuts and into the drawing rooms and secret chapels of contemporary Paris. This gave painters permission. Suddenly, themes of spiritual corruption, mystical heresy, and the allure of the abyss were not just ancient history. They were pressing, provocative subjects ripped from the headlines of the occult revival. A painter could now depict a scene of occult ritual, not as a generic witch's Sabbath, but as a specific, tense gathering of modern decadence, a visual exploration of the very temptation Huysmans documented. The book asked a terrifying question that resonated through studios. What happens when the search for transcendence twists, and the seeker, tired of the light, deliberately turns to face the wall of shadows. Huysmans provided a map of that descent, and artists began to follow its contours with their brushes, daring to give form to the era's most forbidden spiritual anxieties. Brussels became a crucible for the strange and the sublime. While Paris debated in salons, the Belgian symbolists forged a world uniquely their own, one that balanced mystical serenity with a riotous, almost savage critique of modern society. At the heart of this scene was the playwright Maurice Maeterlinck, a man who wrote not of action, but of atmosphere. His plays, like The Haunting Pelléas and Melisande, were less about what characters did and more about what they failed to say. His stage was a world of whispers, of characters moving like sleepwalkers through dim castles, guided by unseen forces of fate and intuition. The dialogue is sparse, filled with pauses where the silence itself becomes a character, heavy with unspoken meaning and impending doom. This was pure symbolist philosophy translated into theater, the belief that truth resides in the spaces between words, in the vibrations of the unseen. When Claude Debussy later transformed it into an opera, he captured that very quality with shimmering, elusive music that seemed to drift from another world. For Belgian painters, Maeterlinck's dramas provided a profound thematic blueprint. They validated an art of mood over narrative, of suggestion over declaration. His characters, trapped in cycles of silent longing and inescapable destiny, mirrored the symbolist artist's own feeling of being caught between a material world they rejected and a spiritual one they could only glimpse. If Maeterlinck represented the movement's quiet, mystical pole, his countryman James Ensor embodied its loud, grotesque, and brilliantly offensive opposite. Ensor is often seen as a bridge to the raw emotion of Expressionism, but his roots are deeply planted in the symbolist obsession with masks and hidden realities. He lived and worked above his family's curiosity shop in Ostend, surrounded by a chaotic collection of masks, seashells, carnival props, and exotic trinkets. This environment was not just a home, it was his personal cabinet of curiosities, a physical manifestation of a mind that saw the world as a bizarre and often horrifying masquerade. His monumental, shocking masterpiece, Christ's Entry into Brussels in 1889, is the ultimate expression of this vision. At first glance, the title suggests a religious painting, but what Ensor created is a sprawling, chaotic carnival of the damned. A giant, garish parade fills the canvas, a teeming mob of citizens, soldiers, and politicians, all wearing grotesque, grinning masks. In the center, almost lost in the cacophony, is a small, pale, and serene figure of Christ riding on a donkey. The scene is not a celebration, it is a savage satire. Ensor is depicting the modern world, specifically Belgian society, as a hollow spectacle. The masks are the key symbolist and occult symbol here. In mystical traditions, masks can be tools for ritual transformation, allowing the wearer to channel another entity or aspect of the self. But in Ensor's hands, they become symbols of something darker, the false faces people wear in public life, the hidden hypocrisy of politics, religion, and social convention. The mask hides the true self, but in doing so, it reveals the collective grotesquerie beneath the surface. The crowd is not welcoming a savior. It is engulfing him in a tide of meaningless noise and empty ritual. The painting is a scream of disillusionment. It uses the symbolic language of the carnival, a world turned upside down, to say that everyday life itself is the real grotesque parody. Ensor's Christ is a symbol of pure, silent truth being ignored by a masked society drunk on its own empty pageantry. This powerful, chaotic work demonstrates the incredible range of symbolism. It could be Maeterlinck's world of hushed premonitions and delicate fate, or it could be Ensor's riot of color and critique. Both, however, shared a core belief that the visible world was a deceitful facade. and that the artist's job was to tear the mask away, whether with a whisper or a scream. The mask of society demanded its own sacred antidote, amidst the quiet mysticism of Maeterlinck and the raucous satire of Ensor. A third force emerged in Belgium and France, one determined to rebuild the ideal with absolute, uncompromising purity. This force had a name, Josephine Paladin, and he declared himself not merely an artist or critic, but a Tsar, an Assyrian priest-king reborn to redeem Western art from what he saw as a swamp of vulgar realism. With a theatrical flair that captivated and infuriated Paris, this flamboyant mystic launched a crusade. In 1892, he founded the Salon de la Rose-Croix, a yearly exhibition that would become the most important and controversial platform for symbolist art in Europe. This was no ordinary gallery show. It was a temple. Paladin's mission was explicit and radical: to forge a new sacred art, one that would heal the spiritual sickness of the modern age by fusing Catholic mysticism, Platonic ideals, and Rosicrucian secrecy into a single, glorious aesthetic doctrine. He turned his back entirely on the world of factories, politics, and everyday life. To ensure his vision remained unsullied, Paladin issued a set of strict, almost monastic rules for submission. No paintings of contemporary scenes, no patriotic or military glorification, no portraits unless they were of a mystical or legendary figure. He banned still lifes and landscapes considered merely decorative. Anything that celebrated the material world for its own sake was rejected at the door. Instead, he called for works drawn exclusively from a higher realm: Catholic dogma, ancient myth, allegory, pure allegory, and the sacred dream. The artists responded in droves, seeing in Paladin's salon a rare sanctuary that understood their deepest aspirations. Figures like Fern and Knopf, whose introspective portraits of his sister Marguerite fit the mystical brief perfectly, and Carlos Schwabe, whose theosophical visions like the death of the grave digger served as perfect sermons in paint, became stars of the Rose-Croix. For 6 years, these salons provided a unified public face for occult-inspired art. Walking through the galleries, a visitor would be surrounded not by scenes of Parisian boulevards, but by angels, androgynous saints, haunted knights, and luminous souls ascending from tombs. It was a total environment designed to provoke a spiritual experience, to lift the viewer out of the mundane. The press, of course, was divided. Some critics hailed the salon as a return to spiritual grandeur, while others ridiculed Paladin as a pompous charlatan and mocked the art as morbid, pretentious, and hopelessly out of touch. Yet, even the ridicule served his purpose. It proved he was not of the secular world. By creating this dedicated space, Paladin achieved something monumental. He transformed a scattered, personal quest into a coherent movement with a manifesto and a pulpit. He gave occult symbolism a stage, and for a brief, luminous period, he made the search for the ideal the most talked about art in Paris. But what happens when a quest for the absolute becomes a rigid doctrine? The very purity Paladin demanded would soon face a revolution from within, as a new generation of artists began to seek the spiritual not in ancient legends, but in the raw, primal forces of color and form itself. The studio itself became a sealed vessel for a sacred transformation, while Paladin preached a return to Catholic mysticism. Another, older esoteric current flowed even deeper beneath the symbolist surface, one that offered a perfect metaphor for their entire creative struggle: alchemy. For these artists, alchemy was never about turning literal lead into physical gold. It was the supreme spiritual allegory, a coded map for the purification of the soul, and they saw their own artistic process as its direct parallel. The alchemical quest began with the prima materia, the raw, chaotic first matter, the base substance of the self and the world before any work begins. This is the unformed, confusing reality the symbolist artist sought to escape. Then came the long, difficult stages of transformation, often visualized as colors. The negrito, or blackening, was a stage of putrefaction and despair, where the old self had to be dissolved in darkness. Think of the Inkai, void-like backgrounds of Odilon Redon's early charcoal drawings, his noirs. Those floating eyes and spectral faces emerge from a profound blackness, a visual representation of the negrito, the necessary confrontation with the shadowy, chaotic depths of the psyche before any light can appear. Following this darkness came the albedo, the whitening, a stage of washing and purification, where the material begins to become spiritual. We see this in the emergence of radiant, lunar figures in symbolist art, pale, ghostly forms like the celestial brides in Jan Torup's work, symbolizing a soul cleansed of earthly dross. The final, glorious stage was the rubedo, the reddening, the achievement of the philosopher's stone and the production of spiritual gold. This is the ultimate goal, the state of perfected being. And where do we see this brilliant, triumphant gold? Look at the work of Gustave Moreau. His paintings, like Jupiter and Semele, are veritable treasuries of gilded light. The figures of gods and ascended souls are often bathed in a radiant, metallic aureole, their very flesh seeming to be made of spiritual gold. Moreau was not just decorating with gilt, he was painting the final product of the alchemical process, the human soul transformed and perfected, shining with divine light. For the symbolist, every blank canvas was their prima materia, the struggle with doubt, the descent into the lonely blackness of the creative mind was their negrito. The moment a vision clarified on the canvas, the emergence of a luminous form, was their albedo, and the finished masterpiece, intended to transmit a sublime truth to the viewer, was their rubedo, their philosopher's stone. They were not illustrators of ancient texts, they were modern alchemists, using pigment and symbol to perform the great work upon their own consciousness, aiming to transmute the leaden weight of mundane reality into the pure, enduring gold of spiritual vision. She is the woman who knows too much. Across the darkening canvases of the symbolists, a singular, haunting figure appears again and again. She is Salome, holding the severed head of a prophet with a look of sublime detachment. She is the Sphinx, her animal body coiled in an eternal riddle. She is the sorceress, the Lamia, the priestess of a forgotten cult. This is the symbolist femme fatale, and to dismiss her as a simple male fantasy of a dangerous woman is to miss the profound occult terror and promise she embodies. In the secret language of this art, she is not a person, but a principle, the living symbol of everything the material world fears and the mystic seeks, the untamed, intuitive, and transformative forces of the universe itself. Gustave Moreau painted her not as a seductress, but as a visionary. In his The Apparition, Salome does not dance with lust, she stands transfixed, her hand outstretched not in desire, but in revelation, pointing at the luminous, disembodied head of John the Baptist floating before her. Moreau himself wrote that he saw her as an eternal, timeless type, an unconscious instrument of destiny. She is the channel for a supernatural force, the human vessel through which a brutal spiritual truth manifests. Her dance is not for a king, but a ritual that cracks open reality. She is dangerous not because of her sexuality, but because her actions unleash a power from beyond the veil, a power that decapitates old dogma to make way for a terrifying new vision. Aubrey Beardsley, in his illustrations for Oscar Wilde's play, sharpened this figure into a weapon of modern decadence. His Salome is all calculated artifice and will, her elongated form a pattern of sinuous, controlling lines. In his infamous drawing, The Climax, the grotesque plume of blood from John's neck is as stylized as the peacock feathers on her skirt. Here, the femme fatale is the avatar of a transgressive, creative, destructive energy. She represents the magical act of inversion, of taking a sacred symbol and remaking it into a new, shocking form to break the viewer's complacency. Her power is the power of the taboo, a force that in certain occult traditions is not to be shunned, but harnessed as the first, chaotic step toward a higher state of being. She is the necessary destroyer. This theme of dangerous wisdom finds its most enigmatic expression in Fern and Cage Knopf's The Caress. The Sphinx, with the head of a woman and the body of a cheetah, presses her face against the youth Oedipus in a silent, intimate communion. This is no monster waiting to devour the wrong answer. The riddle here is not spoken, it is embodied. The Sphinx is the guardian of the threshold, the keeper of the ultimate mystery, which is the reconciliation of opposites, human and animal, masculine and feminine, intellect and instinct. Oedipus does not slay her, he touches her, he accepts the caress. In this occult reading, the femme fatale does not destroy the true seeker, she tests him. She annihilates the unprepared, those who approach with brute logic or arrogance, but for the initiate who recognizes her as a reflection of his own inner duality, she offers a silent, transformative union. She is the ultimate teacher, but her classroom is perilous. This figure connects directly to esoteric concepts of the divine feminine, known in Kabbalah as the Shekinah, or in alchemy as the Queen. She is not a passive goddess of mercy, but an active, sometimes fierce, manifestation of cosmic wisdom and natural law. She is the secret knowledge that cannot be written in books, only encountered. The Lamia, the sorceress, the moon pale enchantress in so many of these paintings, symbolizes the allure of the subconscious itself, that deep, intuitive, and amoral well of creativity and primal energy. To gaze upon her is to gaze into the abyss of one's own hidden nature. The symbolists, steeped in occultism, understood that the path to spiritual gold led directly through this dark, fascinating territory. The femme fatale is the map and the territory. She is the perilous initiation. She asks the only question that matters, not with words, but with her impossible presence. Are you seeking pretty lies, or are you brave enough to face the beautiful, terrible truth? Arthur Rimbaud saw the alphabet in color. In his explosive sonnet Voyelles, written when he was just 16, the poet declared a secret code. A is black, E is white, I is red, U is green, O is blue. With a few defiant lines, he claimed to unveil the hidden hues of language itself, asserting that every vowel possessed its own inherent shade, its own scent and texture. This was not mere poetic fancy. It was a radical statement of belief in a fundamental occult truth, the doctrine of correspondences. This ancient Hermetic principle, as above, so below, taught that every element in the universe is mystically linked, creating a vast, vibrating web of connections. A planet, a musical note, a gemstone, a day of the week, and a human emotion could all resonate on the same spiritual frequency. For the symbolists, this meant the senses were not separate channels, but doors to the same hidden room. Their great ambition became the artistic unification of these senses, a pursuit of synesthesia, where one might hear a painting or see a symphony. This was the logical next step in their magical practice. If a symbol could unlock an idea, then a carefully orchestrated blend of color, form, and suggestion could transport the viewer into an entirely new state of consciousness. Odilon Redon, who illustrated many of Rimbaud's works, understood this perfectly. His shift from the profound blacks of his charcoal drawings to his later, radiant pastels was a move from a silent world to a humming, chromatic one. In works like his pastel series, The Birth of Venus, color is not descriptive. It is emotive and vibrational. The swirling pinks, golds, and blues do not simply depict a goddess. They attempt to evoke the feeling of divine beauty, to make it resonate in the viewer's mind like a chord struck on some inner instrument. He was painting the aura of the subject, not its physical shell. James McNeill Whistler took this idea and made it the very title of his work. He rejected narrative titles, calling his paintings arrangements harmonies and most famously nocturnes. His nocturnes in black and gold, or in blue and silver, are not pictures of London at night. They are visual equivalents of musical compositions. The hazy bridges, the shimmering lights on dark water, the subtle gradations of tone, all are orchestrated to produce a specific mood, a quiet, contemplative feeling akin to listening to a piece of ambient music. He insisted the art critic should approach his work as a musician would, analyzing its tones and harmonies. This synesthetic quest found its most systematic expression in the structured cosmologies the symbolists studied. In the Kabbalistic tree of life, a central diagram of Western esotericism, each of the 10 spheres, or sephiroth, representing an emanation of the divine, is assigned a specific color, a musical note, a scent, and a planetary association. To meditate upon the sphere of Jebura, which represents severity and strength, one might focus on the color red and the musical note of E sharp, aligning one's consciousness with that particular divine attribute. Theosophy, too, taught that colors and sounds were expressions of different levels of spiritual vibration. For an artist immersed in these systems, a palette was not a random selection of paints. It was a carefully tuned instrument. Choosing a specific blue was not just an aesthetic decision. It was an invocation of the corresponding spiritual force, perhaps the sphere of Chist, associated with mercy and the planet Jupiter. The canvas became a ritual space where these correspondences were activated. By arranging colors and forms according to these occult maps, the artist was not just creating an image, they were constructing a kind of machine for transcendence, a multi-sensory portal designed to bypass logic and tune the viewer's soul to a higher frequency. This was art as alchemy of the senses, where the ultimate goal was not to show you a vision, but to make you hear the color of a dream and see the silent music of the spirit. The canvas was now a portal, vibrating with unseen forces. Where did this occult quest lead when the final veil was pulled away? It led to a world where the object itself dissolved, leaving only the pure energy it once symbolized. This was not the end of the journey, but its ultimate destination, the birth of abstract art. And at that pivotal moment stood Wassily Kandinsky, a man who did not just paint his visions, but wrote their manifesto. In 1911, he published a small book with a monumental title, Concerning the Spiritual in Art. In its pages, Kandinsky, a devoted theosophist, articulated what the symbolists had been practicing for decades. He declared that the modern world was a spiritual wasteland, and that the artist's duty was to become a prophet, a priest of a new age. He argued that color and form were not merely decorative. They were direct expressions of the soul, capable of touching the human spirit as precisely as a musical note. A sharp yellow could sound like a trumpet blast. A deep blue could evoke the solemn tones of a cello. This was the doctrine of correspondences, stripped of its last attachment to the physical world. Kandinsky asked the revolutionary question that symbolism had been edging toward for 30 years. If the true purpose of art is to express spiritual reality, and if a symbol's power lies in what it points to, not what it is, then why depict the object at all? Why paint a tree to symbolize growth, when a surging vertical green form could convey the feeling of growth itself? Why illustrate an angel, when a burst of radiant white light could evoke the sensation of divine presence? His answer was to eliminate the middleman. He abandoned the symbol and went straight for the spiritual vibration it was meant to trigger. In paintings like Composition 7, the world explodes into a cosmic storm of color and line. There is no saint, no sphinx, no femme fatale. There is only the chaotic, ecstatic music of creation itself, a visual symphony composed to resonate directly with the viewer's inner life. This was the logical, breathtaking conclusion of the symbolist premise. The occult seed had finally broken through the soil of representation. A similar purification was happening in the work of Piet Mondrian. We know him for the severe, calming grids of black lines and primary colors. but his path to that purity began in the murky, mystical forests of symbolism. His early works, like his series of paintings of a single tree, show the process in action. He starts with a naturalistic, twisting apple tree, but over successive canvases, he pares it down, simplifying its curves into a web of rhythmic lines, then into almost pure vertical and horizontal forces. He was not painting a tree. He was seeking the universal rhythm within it. The hidden geometric harmony that Theosophy taught underpinned all of nature. His famous grids are not designs for floor tiles. They are maps of an ideal spiritual order, a balanced universe where dynamic tension finds perfect, silent resolution. The red, yellow, and blue planes are not just colors. They are fundamental energies held in a sacred, stable relationship. Mondrian sought the absolute, and he found it not in a goddess or a myth, but in the perpendicular intersection of a line. The legacy is unmistakable. The symbolists retreat from the material world, their immersion in theosophy and hermetic philosophy, their belief in art as a ritual tool for spiritual transformation. All of this did not vanish. It underwent its own alchemical transmutation. The negrito of symbolist darkness and complex symbols gave way to the albedo of purification, and finally to the rubedo of pure, abstract light. The haunted nights and silent sirens faded, but their purpose, to connect the human soul to a higher reality, burned brighter than ever in the radiant color fields and dynamic geometries that came to define the 20th century. The occult was not a quirky sidebar in art history. It was the very catalyst that allowed art to finally divorce itself from the physical world, to become a language for the invisible. The brushstrokes had begun to dissolve, but the vision did not end at the frame. For the true initiate, the transformation of consciousness demanded a total environment, a world rebuilt from the ground up according to occult principles of harmony and vibration. This ambition found its ultimate expression in a powerful German concept, the Gesamtkunstwerk, or total work of art. It was the dream of a space where painting, sculpture, architecture, and design would fuse into a single, overwhelming sensory experience, a temple designed not for worship in the old sense, but for the ritual of daily living. Here, the symbolist's desire to evoke spiritual states leapt from the canvas and began to shape the very walls one lived within. A key architect of this new reality was the Belgian designer Henry van de Velde. Rejecting the rigid, historical styles of the past, he pioneered a radically new visual language of sinuous, whiplashing lines and organic, asymmetrical forms. His furniture seemed to grow rather than be built. His metalwork flowed like liquid vines. This was not mere decoration. It was a philosophical statement rooted in occult vitalism, the belief that a spiritual life force animates all of nature. Van de Velde saw his curling lines as direct expressions of that universal energy, a visual mantra meant to align the inhabitant with the creative pulse of the cosmos. To sit in one of his chairs or to touch his door handle was, in his view, to physically connect with a living, spiritual current. This philosophy reached its breathtaking apex in the interiors of Brussels, particularly in the Hotel Salve, designed by Victor Horta. Stepping into its entrance hall was like entering the interior of a luminous, exotic organism. Nothing was arbitrary. A single, unifying motif, often derived from the delicate curve of a stem or the unfurling of a leaf, would begin in the wrought iron railing of the staircase, curl across the mosaic floor, blossom in the stained glass skylight, and echo in the fabric of the upholstery. Light filtered through glass panels resembling dragonfly wings, casting dappled, underwater patterns on walls that themselves curved and swelled. Every object, from a door hinge to a ceiling lamp, was part of a choreographed symphony. This was the Gesamtkunstwerk in lived reality, a complete aesthetic ecosystem. But to see it only as beautiful design is to miss its occult heart. In traditions like sacred geometry and the Kabbalah, space itself can be consecrated. A correctly proportioned room, adorned with specific symbolic patterns, was believed to attract beneficial spiritual influences and elevate the consciousness of those within it. Horta and Van de Velde were, in effect, practicing a form of architectural magic. They were not just building houses, they were constructing talismans on a grand scale. The Hotel Salve was a three-dimensional spell, its every organic line intended to vibrate in harmony with natural law, to banish the harsh angles of the industrial world and cultivate a state of serene, elevated awareness in its wealthy occupants. The home became a sanctuary for the soul, and the act of moving through it, a silent, daily ritual. This blurring of art and life was the final, logical step of the symbolist quest, where the boundary between creating a vision and living inside of it completely disappeared. But the search for the absolute has a shadow, a twin path that leads not upward toward the light, but defiantly into the embrace of the forbidden. For every artist painting angels and ascensions, another was drawn to the darker, more dangerous currents of the occult revival, to the allure of the left-hand path. This was not a rejection of mysticism, but a profound inversion of it, a fascination with the figure of Satan reinterpreted not as evil, but as the ultimate rebel, the light bringer, Lucifer. This darker current reveals that symbolist occultism was never a single doctrine, but a full spectrum of esoteric thought, from the pious Catholic mysticism of Paladin to the provocative, transgressive Satanism of the Decadents. The writer Joris Karl Huysmans opened this door with his novel Labas, but the artist who most fearlessly stepped through it was the Belgian printmaker Félicien Rops. His etchings are a catalogue of blasphemy and eroticism, a deliberate assault on bourgeois morality and religious orthodoxy. In works like The Temptation of St. Anthony, the saint is not tormented by traditional demons, but by a voluptuous, naked woman whose body is the very engine of temptation. In Pornocrates, a blindfolded nude woman is led by a pig on a leash, a savage satire on the era's perceived moral and spiritual decay. Rops did not shy away from explicit diabolical imagery, depicting Satan not as a horned monster, but as a sophisticated, androgynous dandy presiding over scenes of occult ritual. His art was a weapon of transgression, aiming to shock the viewer out of complacency by celebrating everything society deemed sinful. This was more than simple shock value. It was rooted in a specific, radical reinterpretation of Satan that flowed through certain esoteric circles, drawing from romantic poets like Byron and Shelley, and from ancient Gnostic heresies. Some thinkers began to see the devil in a new light. In Gnostic belief, the material world was not created by a benevolent God, but by a flawed, ignorant demiurge, a false god who trapped divine sparks of light in the prison of flesh. In this framework, the serpent in Eden, the bringer of knowledge, becomes a liberator. Satan, or Lucifer, becomes the rebellious spirit who offers humanity the gnosis, the secret knowledge, needed to see through the demiurge's illusion and achieve true spiritual freedom. He is the adversary not of good, but of a tyrannical, false order. For artists like Rops, and for the decadents who admired him, this made Satan a profoundly compelling symbol. He represented the ultimate individualist, the being who dared to say no to divine authority. To embrace Satanism, or its aesthetic, was to perform a ritual of intellectual and spiritual rebellion. It was a way to declare independence from a society they saw as hypocritical, from a church they viewed as repressive, and from a materialist science that denied the soul. The Black Mass, so luridly detailed by Huysmans, was the ultimate ritual of this inversion, taking the sacred symbols of the established order and deliberately profaning them to unlock their opposite, hidden power. This darker twin of symbolism shows that the movement's occult roots were not a safe haven of gentle spirituality. They were a charged field of immense tension, where the quest for transcendence could just as easily turn toward a fascinated, dangerous dance with the forces of dissolution and revolt. The same yearning that drove an artist to paint a golden saint could drive another to etch a defiant, elegant devil. Both were seeking liberation from a world they found false, one by building a new temple, the other by burning the old one down. The luminous temples and dark dreams of the symbolists did not go unchallenged. For every viewer who felt a spiritual tremor before a canvas by Redon or Morau, there was a critic who saw only madness and decay. The art establishment, steeped in the values of the Academy and the rising tide of modernist formalism, launched a fierce counterattack against what they viewed as a dangerous retreat from reality. Their words were not gentle. They branded the movement with a vocabulary of pathology. Works were dismissed as morbid, a fixation on death and decay. They were called obscure, deliberately incomprehensible, and elitist. The favorite insult, however, was hysterical. This was a deeply gendered term, implying the artists suffered from a nervous disorder historically associated with women, a loss of rational control. By labeling the art hysterical, critics sought to pathologize its entire emotional and mystical project, framing it as a symptom of weakness, not a source of strength. Émile Zola, the champion of literary naturalism, famously scoffed at what he saw as the movement's vagueness. He demanded clarity and fact, not whispers from the void. For him, a painting of a worker was truth. A painting of a phantom was an evasion. This clash was fundamental. Symbolism's rejection of technical realism was not a minor stylistic quirk. It was a declaration of war on the Academy's core belief that art's purpose was to master and represent the visible world. To paint an inner vision was, in their eyes, to abandon the artist's duty. Even more cutting was the criticism that these themes were effeminate. The obsession with dreams, mysticism, delicate sensuality, and passive, enigmatic women stood in stark contrast to the heroic, muscular narratives of traditional history painting. This art was not about action, but reception, not about conquest, but contemplation. In a cultural landscape that prized masculine vigor and clear-eyed progress, symbolism's inward gaze was interpreted as a sign of softness, even degeneration. This tension only heightened with the dawn of new avant-garde movements like Cubism. While symbolists sought to depict the soul behind the object, the Cubists, emerging just years later, sought to analyze the object itself from multiple angles, breaking it down into a formal puzzle of geometry and plane. Theirs was a cerebral, structural agenda, a different kind of rebellion that had little patience for what they might see as the misty sentimentalism of occult visions. To a Cubist, a glass was a collection of shifting perspectives. To a symbolist, a glass might be a symbol of the vessel of the soul. They shared a rejection of realism, but their destinations were worlds apart. This backlash, however, reveals the true radicalism of the symbolist stance. Their occult roots were not a private eccentricity, they were a public provocation. To embrace Hermeticism or Theosophy was to explicitly choose a side in a cultural war, to value ancient secret knowledge over modern scientific fact, intuition over observation, the irrational over the rational. It made their art a risky, revolutionary act. Every painting of a floating eye or a golden saint was a quiet manifesto, a piece of evidence in the trial against a materialist age. The critics' fury only proved how deeply their symbolic arrows had struck the armor of the establishment. The journey began with a single, floating eye in a black sky. That strange, silent image was our entry point into a world where art was a secret language, a coded ritual performed on canvas. We witnessed the spiritual hunger of the late 19th century, a world disillusioned by cold science and hollow industry that sent artists searching for meaning in forbidden libraries. They found their maps in the cosmic doctrines of Theosophy and the intricate correspondences of French magicians like Eliphas Lévy. They found their community in hidden salons and secret societies like the Rose Croix, where the painter was consecrated as a modern magician. From there, we watched as these ideas transformed into visions, from Gustave Moreau's jeweled alchemical temples to Odilon Redon's psychic charcoal noirs, from Carlos Schwabe's serene theosophical ascensions to the dark, inverted rebellions of the decadents. The core thread is undeniable. Symbolism was not merely an art style inspired by spooky stories. It was the primary visual dialect of a massive occult revival. It was the brushstroke manifestation of a society desperately trying to speak with the invisible. This was art as a sacred act, a deliberate attempt to use symbol and color to forge a key to the unseen world. The legacy of this magical rebellion did not vanish with the end of the 19th century. Its echoes are everywhere in the art that followed. The Surrealists, with their automatic drawing and excavations of the dream world, are the direct psychic descendants of Redon and his voyage into the astral plane. The entire genre of modern fantasy and visionary art, with its otherworldly landscapes and archetypal beings, drinks from the same symbolic well the symbolists first dug. You can see it in the Gothic subcultures that embrace the melancholic beauty and romantic darkness these artists perfected, and in the continued fascination with tarot and alchemy in contemporary illustration. The symbolists proved that art could be a vessel for mystery, a container for the luminous. So let us return, finally, to where we began, to that first haunting image. Odilon Redon's eye, like a strange balloon, mounts toward infinity. It is no longer just an eye. It is the symbol of the entire movement, the act of turning the gaze away from the solid ground of the material world and directing it with unwavering intent into the boundless, mysterious sky of the spirit. Symbolism reminds us that art was once, and perhaps can be again, a quest not just for beauty, but for the sacred and the unseen. The next time you stand before one of these paintings, look closer. See past the surface of the myth or the dream. Look for the hidden geometry, the deliberate color, the symbol placed with ritual care. Ask yourself what secret the artist was trying to whisper across the centuries. Which of these occult symbols or visions speaks most deeply to you? Is it the serene angel of a Schwabe, the grotesque mask of an Ensor, or the silent sphinx of a cage knob? Share the symbol that caught your eye in the comments below, and keep looking up.